We want to now take a deep dive into what the president was holding up in the Rose Garden. It's a list of countries and the tariffs he is imposing on those countries.
Carney delivering a response to Donald Trump's tariffs. So let's bring in CBS News correspondent Chanel Call following this breaking news. What are you hearing?
Canada isn't just a friendly neighbor. It's the artery pumping life into America's energy grid. Canada supplies more than half of all U.S. crude oil imports, clocking in at 3.7 million barrels per day as of 2024, a lifeline worth over $70 billion annually, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA. That's not all. 9 billion cubic meters of liquefied natural gas, LNG, flow south each year, keeping homes in states like Minnesota and Michigan from freezing in the dead of winter. And then there's electricity, the silent giant in this game. Ontario, Canada's industrial juggernaut, dropped a nuclear bomb on April 1st, 2025. A 25% tariff on electricity exports to the U.S., a move that could jack up power bills and leave entire regions scrambling. This isn't a bluff, it's a calculated strike. If Ottawa flips the switch, states dependent on Canadian hydropower and grid support could face blackouts, with the Department of Energy estimating a potential 20% shortfall in peak demand zones by winter 2025. Why now? Trump's been poking the bear for years. 25% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum in 2018 were bad enough. But the March 2025 escalation to a 50% tariff on all Canadian goods, paired with the insane demand that Canada become the 51st state, lit the fuse. Canada's response was swift and savage. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau thundered, "Canada is not for sale. Our sovereignty is non-negotiable." Ontario Premier Doug Ford piled on, snarling, "We control America's lights, and we'll turn them off if we have to." The numbers back up the threat. Canada's oil fuels 50% of U.S. refining capacity. Cut that off, and J.P. Morgan's March 2025 analysis predicts gas prices could surge by $1.20 per gallon within months. LNG disruptions? Goldman Sachs warns of a 15 to 20% spike in heating costs for U.S. households by December 2025, just as winter bites. This is economic warfare with a kill shot, and Canada's holding the trigger. Trump's team claims it's a negotiation tactic, but Canada's not playing poker. They're playing chess, and they've got the U.S. in check. Canada's energy dominance isn't just leverage, it's a guillotine over America's neck. The U.S. has leaned on its northern neighbor for decades, assuming loyalty was a given. But Trump's tariff tantrums have shattered that trust. The EIA projects the U.S. will become a net oil importer again by 2030. Lose Canada now, and that timeline accelerates, leaving refineries desperate and consumers furious. Experts like Steve Lehman of CNBC, who called the 50% tariff insanity on March 11, 2025, argue the U.S. lacks a coherent strategy, just a bully swinging wildly. Canada's betting on that chaos, daring Trump to push further and risk an energy crisis that could tank his presidency. Will he back off, or double down and watch the lights go out? Now shift gears, literally. The U.S. auto industry, a crown jewel of American manufacturing, is caught in Canada's crosshairs, and it's bleeding bad. In 2024, Canada exported over $80 billion in cars and parts to the U.S., feeding the supply chains of Detroit, Ohio, and beyond, per Statistics Canada. Ford, GM, Tesla, they all rely on Canadian aluminum, steel, and components to keep assembly lines humming. Then Trump dropped the hammer. A 25% tariff on Canadian autos in January 2025, sold as a win for American workers. Canada didn't flinch. They hit back harder, revoking tax incentives for U.S. electric vehicles, especially Teslas, effective February 2025. That move could slap $2,500 to $4,000 onto U.S. car prices, according to Ford and GM's March 2025 forecasts. And it's already chaos. The fallout's ugly. Detroit's auto plants reported a 10% cost surge for parts in Q1 2025, per a World Trade Organization WTO report, as Canadian suppliers jacked up prices or rerouted shipments. Tesla's stock tanked 4% in a single day, March 12, 2025. after analysts flagged a supply chain nightmare for EV batteries, 60% of which rely on Canadian minerals. Canada's not just retaliating, they're strangling a $1 trillion industry, and US consumers are the collateral damage. Car dealerships are bracing for sticker shock, while factories face potential shutdowns if parts dry up. The WTO notes US exports to Canada plummeted 12% since the tariffs hit, a sign the pain's two-way. But Canada's betting they can outlast Trump's bluster. Look deeper. This isn't random. Canada's auto sector is a precision weapon, honed by decades of integration with the US under NAFTA and its successor, the USMCA. Trump's tariffs ripped up that playbook, and Canada's response is surgical, targeting EVs to hit Tesla, Trump's golden boy, right in the gut. The message? Mess with us, and your voters pay at the pump and the lot. Meanwhile, Canada's eyeing Europe and Asia for new auto markets, with preliminary talks with the UK in March 2025, signaling a pivot that could leave Detroit in the dust. The US auto industry is a sitting duck in this war. Canada's supply chain dominance means tariffs don't just raise costs, they threaten collapse. Steel production's already down 8% in the US since January 2025, WTO, the sharpest drop in 5 years, and aluminum costs are soaring. Trump's America First rhetoric sounds tough, but it's hollow. GM CEO warned on March 15, 2025, that without Canadian parts, we're dead in the water. Canada's playing a long game, banking on US consumer outrage to force a retreat. If Trump doesn't blink, American jobs could vanish faster than he can tweet about it. Let's take this to the kitchen table, where the stakes get personal. The US and Canada swap $72.6 billion in agricultural goods yearly, a lifeline of canola, wheat, meat, and dairy that keeps American supermarkets stocked. Canola alone, $6 billion annually, fuels cooking oil and livestock feed, a backbone of the US food chain. But Trump's tariff wars turned that partnership into a powder keg. After the 50% tariff demand in March 2025, Canada threatened retaliatory duties on canola and other exports, set to kick in May 2025. That could spike US meat and dairy prices by 8 to 12%, per USDA estimates from March 31, 2025, hammering families already stretched thin. The numbers paint a dire picture. Food inflation's at 5% in the US as of March 2025, USDA. Add Canada's tariffs, and it could hit 10 to 12% by year-end, a level unseen since the 1970s. Grocery bills will sting immediately, with Goldman Sachs projecting a 5 to 15% price jump on consumer goods, cars, electronics, canned goods, by Q3 2025. Canada's not stopping at canola. They're eyeing US steel, tech, and ag products for more retaliation, a multi-front assault that could cripple key industries. Picture this: a Midwest farmer paying double for feed, a New York mom shelling out $5 for a gallon of milk. That's the reality Trump's unleashed. This isn't just tit for tat, it's a calculated escalation. Canada knows food prices are a political third rail in the US, a pressure point to turn voters against Trump's policies. They're betting on chaos in the aisles to force Washington's hand, and the early signs are grim. The S&P 500's down 12% since March 2025, JP Morgan, reflecting market panic over inflation. The IMF warns that if this spirals, the US economy could shrink 2% by 2026, with food costs driving a recession. This is war by other means. Canada's weaponizing its agricultural clout to hit Americans where it hurts most. Trump's tariffs aim to protect US farmers, but they've backfired, exposing how reliant the US is on Canadian imports. The USDA's March report notes a 7% drop in US ag exports to Canada since January, a sign the pain's mutual. But Canada's got deeper reserves and a fiercer resolve. If Trudeau and Carney push this through, Trump's strong economy narrative collapses under the weight of empty shelves and angry shoppers. The question is, can he stomach the backlash? Here's where the plot twists hard. Canada's not just punching back, they're rewriting the global trade map. Trudeau and Carney are racing to cut US reliance, forging new alliances with Europe and Asia at breakneck speed. In March 2025, Canada sealed preliminary energy and auto supply deals with France and the UK, a middle finger to Washington's dominance. The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, tripling capacity to 890,000 barrels per day by 2026, will ship oil straight to Asia's booming markets. The $40 billion LNG Canada project in British Columbia, set to pump 14 million tons of gas yearly by 2028, targets Japan and South Korea, nations hungry for stable energy outside the Middle East. Why the rush? Asia's energy appetite is insatiable. China's oil demand will hit 15 million barrels per day by 2040, per the International Energy Agency, doubling Canada's current output. India's demand will surge 50% in 2 decades. Canada sees a gold mine. 98% of its oil exports went to the US in 2023, EIA. But that's a vulnerability Trump's tariffs exposed. Diversifying to Asia slashes Canada's 75% export dependence on the US, a strategic pivot to secure its future. If Canada locks in multi-decade Asian contracts, US refiners could face $10 per barrel hikes, jacking up gas prices and eroding Washington's leverage. The infrastructure's already rolling. The Trans Mountain project, despite ballooning from $5 billion to $21 billion, is a bet on Pacific markets. LNG Canada, backed by Shell, is the largest private investment in Canadian history. $40 billion to claim a slice of a market the US currently dominates. Canada's not begging for Trump's mercy. They're building an escape hatch, and it's working. Japan and South Korea, importing 80% of their energy, see Canada as a geopolitical safe bet compared to Russia or OPEC. This is Canada's emancipation moment. For decades, the US treated Canada like a loyal gas station. Pipelines, proximity, and NAFTA locked them in. Trump's unpredictability, 25% steel tariffs in 2018, 50% goods tariffs in 2025, shattered that illusion. Now Canada's playing offense, betting Asia's growth outpaces America's tantrums. The EIA warns the US could lose a secure supplier just as it's projected to need imports by 2030, forcing a scramble for costlier oil. Trump's pushing Canada into the arms of rivals, and the US might wake up to a North America where it's no longer the boss. Amid this economic carnage, Trump's leadership is unraveling like a cheap suit. Former Congressman Adam Kinzinger, an Iraq vet with steel in his spine, torched him in a March 2025 interview. Trump's a coward playing the hero. Kinzinger zeroed in on January 6, 2021. Trump watching the Capitol riot from his dining room, glued to Fox News like it was a reality show, doing nothing as democracy burned. Compare that to Canada's leaders. Trudeau and Carney aren't tweeting threats. They're swinging economic sledgehammers with precision and guts. Kinzinger went deeper, painting Trump as a fragile shell. He dodged Vietnam with a foot thing and 5 deferments, then trashed vets like John McCain while crowing about his own patriotism. Kinzinger, who faced real combat, called it a sham. Trump can't fathom sacrifice. He's a WWE wrestler with a spray tan and a script. Then the zinger, a bizarre jab at Trump's pungent odor of ketchup, makeup, and sweat. Petty? Sure. But it sticks. A man too weak to lead, crumbling as Canada lands blow after blow. The evidence piles up. Markets are screaming. S&P 500 down 12%, Dow Jones off 10% since March 2025, JP Morgan. And Trump's response? More bluster, no plan. Kinzinger's critique isn't just personal. It's a Molotov cocktail into the GOP, where cracks are widening. Trump's base still cheers, but moderates and business leaders are jumping ship, with CEOs like Tesla's Elon Musk warning of catastrophic fallout on March 14, 2025. Canada's exposing Trump's bluff, and he's got no cards left to play. Trump's a paper tiger in this fight. His tariff war's imploding. U.S. steel production's down 8%, WTO. Consumer prices are spiking, and Canada's outmaneuvering him globally. Kinzinger's attack isn't just rhetoric. It's a mirror to Trump's failures. Inaction on January 6th, weakness now. The GOP's fracturing as Canada's resolve hardens, and Trump's ego can't paper over the economic wreckage. If he can't handle Trudeau, How's he supposed to steer America through this storm? Trump's tariff war isn't just rattling North America. It's sending shockwaves across the globe, and world leaders aren't sitting idle. On April 3rd, 2025, as Trump doubles down with a fresh wave of tariffs targeting Canada, China, and beyond, the international backlash is hitting fever pitch. The G7 and G20 are scrambling to counter Trump's moves, with emergency talks kicking off in Brussels and Tokyo to shield their economies from the fallout. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz didn't mince words, slamming Trump's 50% tariff on Canadian goods as a reckless escalation that threatens global stability. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida echoed the sentiment, vowing to protect our industries from America's economic blackmail. The numbers tell a brutal story. Canada's not alone. China's facing a proposed 60% tariff hike on its exports to the US, a move Trump's team claims will level the playing field. But China's not blinking. Beijing's already drafting retaliatory tariffs on US agricultural exports, targeting soy and pork worth $20 billion annually, per China's Ministry of Commerce on April 2nd, 2025. The EU's in the ring too, with France's Emmanuel Macron pushing for a unified bloc response. Think tariffs on US tech and energy exports topping $30 billion, according to EU trade estimates from March 31st, 2025. This is a global pile-on, and the US is surrounded. Dig into the stakes. Canada's 50% tariff nightmare, tied to that absurd 51st state demand, has allies rethinking their trust in Washington. The DW reports G7 leaders debating a coordinated tariff wall against the US, with Germany eyeing duties on American cars like Ford and Tesla, a $15 billion market, to hit Trump where it hurts. Japan's mulling restrictions on US semiconductors, a $10 billion blow to Silicon Valley, per Japan's meaty projections. Meanwhile, South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol warned on April 3rd that Trump's tariffs could spark a domino effect. Supply chains collapse, prices soar, and no one wins. Zoom in on the wreckage. Trump's tariffs aren't just rattling governments, they're gutting corporate America, and Apple's bleeding out. On April 3rd, 2025, CNBC dropped a bombshell. Trump's latest tariff hikes will slam Apple's non-China supply chains, hitting partners in Canada, Vietnam, and India with a 25 to 50% cost surge. Apple's CFO, Luca Maestri, warned investors that day. These tariffs threaten our diversification strategy. Costs are spiking and production's at risk. This isn't a hiccup. It's a hammer blow to a $2.8 trillion tech titan. Break it down. Canada's a linchpin for Apple. Ontario supplies critical components like aluminum and rare earths for iPhones and Macs, with exports to the US topping $5 billion annually, per Statistics Canada's 2024 data. Trump's 50% tariff, announced March 10, 2025, could add $1.2 billion in costs overnight, forcing Apple to rethink its supply lines. Vietnam and India, key players in Apple's shift away from China, aren't safe either. A proposed 25% tariff on their exports, floated April 2, 2025, could jack up iPhone production costs by 10%, per Morgan Stanley's estimates. That's $15 billion extra Apple's shelling out yearly, and guess who's paying? You, at the store. The ripple's brutal. Apple's stock dipped 3% on April 3rd after the tariff news, wiping out $85 billion in market value in hours, per Bloomberg. Suppliers like Foxconn, already stretched thin, are scrambling. CNBC reports a potential 20% production cut in Vietnam if tariffs stick. Canada's retaliation, those 25% electricity tariffs and auto part strikes, only tightens the noose, with Ontario's supply disruptions threatening delays for the iPhone 17 rollout in September 2025. Consumers face a $200 to $300 price hike per device, analysts warn, just as inflation's already squeezing wallets. This isn't a trade spat, it's a tectonic shift. Canada's hammering America's energy, autos, and food, while forging a future free of US chains. Trump's tariffs aim to dominate, but Canada's counterstrikes have exposed his weakness: economic, political, personal. The US has a choice: retreat, or face a collapse that could drag the world down with it? Will Trump's pride sink the ship, or will sanity prevail? Stay tuned. The truth will crown the victor in this brutal showdown.